سيد الشهداء صلوات. اللهم صل على اللهم صل وتعجيل الدوري ومن زمان عجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف آباد للم صلوات. اللهم صل
رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي يا رسول الله وعلى أهل بيتك المظلومين. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي مولاي وابن مولاي يا أبا عبد الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة يا غريب يا مذموم يا عطشان كربلاء ما خاب من تمسك بكم ولا منها من لجأ إليكم سادتي. يا ليتنا كنا معكم فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. قال الله العظيم في محكم كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق والأصدق القائلين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا قوا أنفسكم وأهليكم نارا. آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. My friends, like we all know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala within the whole Quran and through the teachings and the traditions of the Prophet and his family, peace and blessings be upon them, often stress the importance of the family dynamic when it comes toward Islamic tradition. An abundance of verses of the Quran, anecdotes within the Quran, as well as ahadith of the Prophet and his family, speak to the importance of cultivating a household that is filled with morals and virtues, and distancing ourselves from any vice and that of our children as well. In fact, Allah Azza wa Jal states, for instance, within the whole Quran, in this verse that I began with, He states, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who believe, O anfusakum wa ahlikum, no. Save yourselves and your families from divine punishment. At the end of the day, it's not such that we are so selfish to only think about ourselves and our own attainment of paradise, to the neglect of our families or to the neglect of our children, but rather we strive toward, again, working toward that ultimate objective, which is paradise for all of us in the world beyond this one. But like we know, it comes with its own unique obstacles and challenges. That everyone, no matter where you go, no matter what ethnicity you come from, no matter what language you speak, our biggest concern is the future of our children, the future of our generations. I've been talking to so many people during the course of these last several days, and I know that one of the most important foundations that this community was built upon was upon families and upon children, and an emphasis on figuring it out so that our next generations, they're okay. They have a strong religious identity. They have the values as taught to them by their faith and by their religion, by their culture. It's super vital. And like we know, this is a struggle that every human being today and historically have also faced. And you see this throughout the lifetime of even the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The most famous example, the example of Yusuf and his brothers, for instance. Yaqub alayhi salam numerous times tries to get all of his sons on board, tries to get them to believe, tries to get them to not lie. Many of them dismiss their father, albeit him being a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course, Allah Azza wa Jalla also presents us the example of the story of Nuh and his son. God gives us an entire chapter, chapter 31 of the Holy Quran, Surah Luqman, a conversation between Luqman and his son, who according to our ahadith was a disbeliever and rejected God in his entirety. Meaning that this struggle and this challenge is that which people have faced historically, and nonetheless we are able to extract and deduce lessons from them, such that we are able to cultivate a family and a lifestyle filled with that sense of value that we are aspiring and hoping for. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states within the Holy Quran, Al-Malu wal-Banun Zinat al-Hayat dunya, that surely your wealth and your children, they are an adornment in this world. Everybody likes money. Who doesn't like the beautiful, handsome face of Benjamin Franklin? He's a good-looking guy, right? We like him in our pocket, we like him in our bank account. Everybody loves money. Everybody loves physical, tangible, nice things that we touched base on last night as well. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, not only your wealth are an adornment for you in this world, but also your children. Because we take pride when our children do good things. They might have painted the most ugly painting that you've ever seen in your life, but guess what? It's going to get the most perfect spot in your living room, and anyone and everyone who comes and visits your home, you're going to show them how incredible of an artist that your child is. Am I right? Or am I wrong? At the end of the day, they're an adornment for us because we live through them, and we desire to see their success. And the good that they do, it emanates in terms of the good that we do. And we're excited with their excitement as well. But at the same time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in this verse he states that your wealth and your children are an adornment for you. In another verse of the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jalla states, إِنَّمَا أَمْوَالُكُمْ وَأَوْلَادُكُمْ فِتْنَةٌ, that surely your wealth and your children, they are also a trial for you. The most dangerous, the most challenging, the biggest obstacle that most people face is with regards to one of these two things. Either too little money or too much money, how we're going to spend that money, how we're going to be held accountable by the money that we left behind, in addition to our children. And they try us in unique ways. From when they're young, they try our bodies, by the difficulty that we go through, that their mothers go through. How difficult it is also to find enough money to send them to school, to take them to doctor's appointments, and all of the other difficulties and obstacles and challenges that go along with them. But at the same time, as they grow up, they ask questions that we don't know how to answer. They test us in ways based on their behavior that we could have never imagined that a child could do this to me after I raised them. And again, we go through these different obstacles and challenges during the course of our life, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that we will be tried in some way via these two things, undoubtedly, one's wealth and one's children. But that requires us then to be that much more focused and that much more diligent. Because you know the unique thing about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's examinations and his trials and his tribulations are that he spells them out for us. He doesn't give us the questions, but he tells us that you will be tried by these things. You just gotta be ready for it. And when we're ready for something, the opportunity to tackle it, to take it on, is that much more clear and probably a little bit easier as well. When you get a question on an exam, when you're in college, when you're in high school, when you're in whatever, that totally throws you off and you're like, wait a minute, I had no idea the professor was going to ask me this type of question. You get annoyed, you get frustrated. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it super clear. Our examinations, many a times, they might come from one of these two. One's wealth, one's children, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, we've been given the answers to those questions as well. We've been given this guidebook. And again, I say this with all sincerity, and I said it a couple of nights ago. My friends, we have like such an incredible legacy from the Prophet and his family, alayhi salam. Incredible. The ahadith of Ahlul Bayt are so beautiful. All we have to do is take like 2, 3, 4. I know right now is busy. Everyone's going to Majlis. You're doing all these crazy things. Everyone's schedule's out of whack. After Ashura, dedicate yourselves to 2, 3, 4 minutes a day in reading the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt, in reading the du'as, of Sahifat al-Sajjadiyya of Ali Zain al-Abidin. The dua that we make for our children, the dua that we recite for our children as narrated by Ali Zain al-Abidin is so powerful and so devotional, is so beautiful. As well as all of the advices, like I said before, struggle with our kids is something prehistoric. Everyone worried about this. And you would see people would go to the Imams of Ahlul Bayt and say, "Oh, grandson of the Messenger of God, my child is up to no good. Give me some advice." And they would say these things. And then they would preemptively state, "And do this for your children. These are the rights of your children over you," so on and so forth, in order to get their community up to the standard that they were expecting. I'll give you one example. A hadith from Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, he states, "Min haqqil walad ala abihi," that from the rights of the child over the parent. Oftentimes we talk about the rights of the parent over the child, right? Because we want to demonstrate our authority over our kids. You know that doing that very often is likely not going to take you very far. It's about finding a sense of balance and also knowing what their rights over us are as well. In the hadith of the Imam Salamullah alayhi states that the rights of the child over their parents are three. أن يحسن اسمه وأن يحسن تعليمه وأن يزوجه إذا بلغ. He states that there are three rights of the child over their parents. The first one of them is that you give your child a good name, like most of us do. We name them after the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We name them after the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. We name them after noble creations of God. We have these incredible examples and these role models, and to choose names from their names are the best of names that we can give to our kids as well. وَأَن يُحْسَنَ تَعْلِيمُهُ. And the second one is to give them a good upbringing, to teach them good etiquette, to teach them good akhlaq. Again, every single one of us undoubtedly strive to do exactly this with our kids. We make mistakes once in a while. We're not perfect, but at the end of the day, the best way, like all of us know, to teach our children good etiquette is to lead by example. So if we perfect our etiquette, their etiquette will be perfected as well. And it doesn't suffice for us to start too late in life, because they are in a state of consistent observance of us at every moment. And thirdly, وَأَن يُزَوِّجُهُ إِذَا بَلَغَ, and that when they become of age, that our responsibility as parents for our children is to get them married. And we strive, and we do the best that we can. And again, we go through different ups and downs during the course of our lives. But nonetheless, most parents have these ultimate objectives toward giving their child a strong, detailed, concise, beautiful, religious identity, so that they're able to answer the questions of life, and that they're able to engage in their faith and their spirituality in a meaningful and an adequate way. But that being said, nonetheless, today, with a rise in doubt and a rise in skepticism and a rise in agnosticism and a rise in atheism and all of the other isms that we are drowned in this world that we live in today, amongst the most central questions that many kids would ask their parents, meaning asking us, is with regards to the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You see, amongst the most significant questions or doubts placed in the mind of theists during the Enlightenment period was this: if God exists and He is the creator of you, then who created God? Popular question. Most of us have heard this question before, but the church and religious institutions for centuries struggled toward answering this question in an adequate way. And like we know, we have a whole host of different responses polemically toward this question. But nonetheless, as we get older and as we have the ability to philosophize and to rationalize and understand the depth of our Islamic theology, we're able to present evidences on the basis of Quran. We're able to find rational evidences to respond to this question. And that's all good, and we don't need to get into those today. The question that many young kids often face is that they pose this question to their parents, and their parents don't know how to answer their questions to them at their young age. You can't philosophize, and you can't rationalize, and you can't give them textual proofs when they're 4 or 5 years old. We got to speak to a level that they understand. And so for today's discussion, Insha'Allah ta'ala, I want to reflect upon how we can speak to our children about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on three different dimensions. The first dimension is in terms of understanding how a child learns in their early stages of life. The second dimension of the discussion is in discussing how, or some wrong methodologies that we often utilize in speaking to our children about faith and religion. And the third dimension is fundamentally asking these specific questions, particularly how we should speak to our children about the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's jump right into dimension number one of this conversation. That's a reflection upon how children develop at a very young age. And let me just say this to open up one quick parenthesis. I am not a therapist, nor am I a child psychologist. I'm in education, and I study different methodologies in terms of how young people learn and they develop. And I'm certain that there are people who can speak to these matters with a lot more expertise than I, but inshallah, I'll try to put a little bit of a faith twist to it so that it can be beneficial for myself and all of us as well. And so when you go ahead and you take a look at the literature around how a child develops from a very young age, it is stated that they naturally go through four specific phases. The first phase that they go through is a phase of observation. A child, when they're very young, they know their surroundings. They know who their mother is. They know who their father is. They know what their crib is. And eventually, as they get a little bit older, they know what their car seat is. And then they start realizing and recognizing who's driving the car. As they get older, they can recognize via voices. They know that's their mom's voice. They know that's their dad's voice. And even though that their parents might not be in the room, they can hear their voices on a phone, on a FaceTime, on a camera. We put cameras in our kids' rooms, and when they're crying, the mother speaks into their phone so that the child can calm down because it feels a sense of comfort via their mother's voices. Children, they go through these stages of observation at that very young age. And they begin to test their parents because they want to see and they want to learn. And children are instinctively curious as well. So, for instance, they will cry and they will cry and they will cry until their parent comes to them and picks them up from the crib. And as they get older, and as we get a little bit wiser, we say, wait a minute. Maybe they're just crying because they don't want to go to sleep by themselves. And so we have to sleep train them. And we go through these different experiences during the course of their life, as well as they are growing and adapting toward this new situation that they're in. At the end of the day, it all stems from this notion of a desire to observe, a desire to learn, a desire to grow, and a desire to figure it all out. Let me say this, my friends. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like we know, has created us with what is known as the fitrah, or this innate nature, this ability for us to learn, this ability for us to know, this ability for us to perceive Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Children, like we said before, are instinctively curious. They get older and they start asking all of these questions. Why? 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 Why is the color red? Why is this thing red? Why is the sky blue? Why is the grass green? And they ask all of these questions, and naturally we get annoyed by these questions. So many a times what we do is we slam the door on their questions, not allowing for them to pursue the sense of curiosity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He made us free. You know how many Quranic verses and ahadith talk about reflection? Dozens of them talk about reflecting upon the sun and the moon and the stars and the oceans and the rivers. We are so busy looking down that we forget to look up. A little while ago during the pandemic, it was raining like crazy in New York City. I was living in my apartment, and we were just stuck inside, and it was a pretty miserable time because we couldn't go out. And it was raining and raining and raining, and all of a sudden, after the rain, the sun came out, and maybe it was the first time in a long time that my two little girls, they saw a rainbow appear in the horizon. And they rushed to the window and they started screaming rainbow, it's a rainbow, it's the most incredible thing we've ever seen. And me and my wife, we took out our phones to take a picture of my children looking at the rainbow. My older daughter, she turns around and she says, Baba, I want to take a picture too. I said, what do you want to take a picture of? She said, I want to take a picture of the rainbow. I said, why do you want to take a picture of the rainbow? You can look at the rainbow with your own eyes. And then she said, Baba, why are you taking a picture then? And I was like, oh shoot, I have no idea. Sometimes we're so fixated on looking down that we forget to look up. Again, the door of our observation and curiosity, it closes because of our society and our environment and our inability to create that opportunity for people to continue to learn, particularly our children. So the first stage that a child goes through when it comes to their early development is through observation. The second one is via play, right? Kids love to play. They love to play in the sand. They love to play in the water. They love to play with mud. They love to put their feet in the pool or in the ocean. They love to put their feet on the grass. They love to get messy. But for them, that is their methodology by which they learn. They begin to start to explore their five senses, particularly the sense of touch. And they begin to love to also test out and experience new things. They put things in their mouth and they spit them out. And we get mad at them. Why are you spitting this out? At the end of the day, that's the way that they're figuring out their senses. They're developing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fashioned us in that way. And a child that is really playful, oftentimes in our minds, we're like, oh man, like this kid is shaitan, dude. Like, what in God's name did God do to give us this child? I give this example only because I asked them. A couple of years ago, my brother's son, he was 3 years old, and he was in the Majlis. And the Sheikh, he said, it's really important that in our communities we start to shake things up. He stated this line. And he was 3 years old, he got up, he started dancing. And his mom told him, like, dude, like, sit down, what are you doing? Why are you dancing? He's like, oh, because Sheikh said we need to shake things up. At the end of the day, that's the way that he understood, and probably everyone was looking and wondering, like, what terrible parents. At the end of the day, no, that's the way that kids learn. That's the way that they develop. They're supposed to be playful. They're supposed to run around. I'm not saying there should be absolutely no discipline, but no, like within measure and within certain boundaries. The third stage that a child often goes through during the course of their early stages of development is that they start to recognize routine. So I'll give you an example. A child, naturally, at a very young age, 1 year, 2 years, 1.5, they are naturally more inclined to their mother than their father. Okay? But even if they're inclined to their father, going beyond their immediate parents or going beyond their immediate caretakers, they're not totally comfortable. And they start to realize when their primary caretakers are going to leave the home. So if their mom is leaves the home, they know, for instance, normally she dresses in a particular type of clothing, or she wears a hijab, for instance. As they get older, they start to cry the minute that they see their mom wearing hijab because they say, oh no, my mom's leaving, for instance. And we go through this sense of routine during the course of our lives, and the child develops that sense of understanding of their circumstances. You follow what I'm saying? And that's super important, and not in a bad way, but in a good way, because again, it shows their positive development toward getting certain context clues, allowing for them to learn and allowing for them to grow. And then fourthly and finally, children go through the stage of communication. They start to identify certain things and certain items and start to utilize their own language toward explaining what that is. So they have their own word for milk, their own word for water, their own word for bathroom, their own word for apple, their own word for TV, their own word for phone, their own word for X and Y and Z. And as they get older, they start to realize, wait a minute, everyone else utilizes another word, though the parents understand their word, and then they start to learn and develop their style and methodology of speech such that they are able to identify and state that this is what I want, and these are my needs, and so on and so forth. Again, I say all of this not to waste your time or to bore you, but for us to have a self-reminder that a lot goes on in a child's mind in terms of their early development. And the ultimate and perhaps most important takeaway, and hear me out, is that children at a very young age, they do not have the capability to understand complex questions or rationalize certain things in unique ways. For instance, we're pretty sarcastic people, right? At least I am. I always make sarcastic statements. And if you study how a child develops, they actually don't have the capacity to understand sarcasm until they're 9 or 10 years old. I mean, the way that we speak to them and the way that we communicate religion to them and God to them and the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to them also has to be in a way whereby we understand that the only thing that they perceive is the ability to see, the ability to touch, which is why their questions are oftentimes so simplistic, and we have gone beyond that stage of our senses toward thinking a little bit deeper, and we no longer have the ability to answer their questions adequately in the way that we are hoping or aspiring. And that brings me then to the second dimension of our discussion. Everyone following? Am I boring you? We're good? Recite one salawat. Should I switch it up with some like Fada'il of Imam Ali? Get everyone excited? Okay, we enter into the second dimension of the discussion. And this is with regards to some poor methods that we often employ when speaking to our children about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or about religion, or about. The first one of these methods that many people often employ is that we again close the door to their curiosity. And we don't allow, or we don't create and cultivate an environment for them to ask questions. Like the famous scholar once said, that every child is an artist until they no longer have a paintbrush. Meaning that every child is creative. They want to engage, and they want to think. They want to do things that are unique. But oftentimes we don't give them the capacity to do so. And as another child psychologist stated, that every child is born a philosopher until we no longer give them the ability to philosophize. Meaning that everyone has questions that they want to ask, but when we are dismissive of their questions, many times we see that they are going to grow up either accepting everything that anyone tells them or rejecting everything that anyone tells them and living a world of doubt and skepticism, which is totally in opposition with the conviction that we would like to cultivate within our kids. So the idea is to create and to not dismiss opportunities. I'll give you the example of Imam Jaffer as-Sadiq alayhi salam. The Imam alayhi salam, he would travel from Medina to Mecca every year during the days of Hajj. And he would spend months there. And he would engage all of the atheists and the agnostics of Mecca. If you open up, for instance, Kitab al-Kafi, and you open up to the book of Tawheed, you will see an abundance of debates that Imam al-Sadiq engages in with those who were his staunchest in opposition. And not only did he sit and he would respond to them, not only in a way that was polemical in order to demonstrate to open up a little. It wasn't such that he dismissed these guys who were being incredibly rude and disruptive to him and to his followers. But furthermore, the Imam alayhi salam also trains a personality, this great companion and confidant of his, a man by the name of Hisham ibn al-Hakam. Many of you might be familiar. Hisham ibn al-Hakam is amongst, again, the closest companions of the Imam sallallahu alayhi, who is known to engage polemically and to respond toward a whole host of doubts regarding matters around atheism and around the belief of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sallu ala Muhammad wa Muhammad. A second really important step, or poor step that we often engage with our children when they ask questions about religion, or when they ask questions about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that we don't answer them adequately and we give them really poor or half answers. Many times because we don't know, but other times because we think that we do know. Let me give you an example. Someone comes to you, your child comes to you, and they say, where is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? You know what amongst the most important, or excuse me, one of the most common answers to that question is? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is everywhere. How many of you have heard this? You heard this before. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is everywhere. I had this instance one day where a kid came to me and he said, Sheikh told me that Allah is everywhere. Does that, and I said, okay. He said, what? I said, what's your question? He said, does that mean that when I flush the toilet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a part of him, na'udhu billah, also goes into the toilet? Again, what's wrong with the child's question? Absolutely nothing. He was literally trying to answer a fundamental question that he himself was pondering on. But he was told that God is everywhere. That means God is in the toilet as well. Na'udhu billah. صلوا على محمد. Other times, for instance, we tell our children, for instance, when they ask you, where is Allah? We say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in your heart. Nice. It sounds poetic. It sounds beautiful. What happens when the child asks the next question? Which is, how about for people who died? That means Allah died with them in their heart. How do you respond? How do you reconcile? How about when they get a little bit older and they wonder, wait a minute, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not like in my heart. Remember, my friends, we said that God has created the human being, and in their early stages of development, the way that they understand is by physical things. They understand via their senses. They won't understand Allah is everywhere. They won't understand that Allah is in our heart. So a second poor method that we often engage when speaking to our children about the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is by giving them poor responses to our questions. And number three, a third poor method that we often employ when speaking to our children about God and about faith is that we give them totally wrong answers, but we know that those wrong answers will keep their mouth shut. Because sometimes the questions that they ask are hard. What I'm saying, my friends, is that when we don't know the answer to the question, say I don't know. That's better than giving them a wrong answer. The hadith of Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says, Nisful ilm he states, Nusful ilm al-qawlu la a'lam. That half of knowledge is saying, I don't know. Then of course, someone might ask, okay, now the parent is telling the child, I don't know. Now the child is going to doubt everything that the parent does know, right? Well, you tell your child at that moment, I don't know right now, but how about we go and read about it? How about we go and learn about it? How about together we go and ask someone who might know? And again, we learn ourselves. Also teaches our kids that when they don't know, they can ask someone who does know. And guess what? When we give our child a wrong answer, how difficult is it to find an alternative answer today? They're going to grow up 3, 4, 5 years from now, have a phone in their hand, Google the same exact question they asked you or asked me or asked us, and realize that, wait a minute, my parent lied to me. That's not the truth. And at that moment, forget their legitimacy in terms of them understanding religion, but they're going to doubt every single thing that you taught them, that I taught them, that we as parents taught our children. And that, my friends, is a much, much bigger problem. You follow what I'm saying? And that brings me then to the third dimension of the discussion. Okay, we know how a child develops. We know some things that we shouldn't do. So how then do we answer these questions about the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with our children? We'll go over 2 today, and of course there are many more. And undoubtedly these 2 questions, their answers may have some holes in them, but we need to scale up to the capacity and to the level of intellect that our children are at before we go ahead and answer them in the first place. So a couple of quick prerequisites before we get to these questions. Prerequisite number 1 is that when your child or when our child comes to us and they ask us about God or ask us about anything about religion, validate them. Don't get triggered. Don't get upset. Validate them. Someone comes to you, your child comes to you and says, I know Allah created me. Well, who created Allah? Don't smack them in the face. Don't beat them with your belt. Of course, none of us do that. And neither did our parents, of course. Right? But we should be validating our children and telling them, you know what? What an intelligent question. You're brilliant. You're so smart. This is such a fantastic question. Because then they have the moral courage to go back tomorrow and ask the same question to someone else when they don't know something. They feel a desire and a curiosity to continue to learn. Prerequisite number 1 is to validate their question. Prerequisite number 2. Prerequisite number 2 is to praise them. Not only their question, but also them. You're an intelligent questioner, but you are also an intelligent person. Why? Because again, it builds up a sense of confidence, especially when they're 3, 4 years old. Again, slamming that door is so dangerous. And prerequisite number 3 is to speak to them in a level that they understand. Like the hadith states, تَكَلَّمَ النَّاسِ عَلَى قَدَرَ أُقُولِهِمْ. Speak to people in a level of their intellect. If you are a professor of philosophy, you can't speak to your child in the same way that you lecture your graduate students in the university. If you're a theologian, you can't teach your children in the same way that you teach the community quoting verses of the Quran and the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. We know that. You have to go through certain prerequisites before they have the capacity to know and have the capacity to learn. Once we can check off these three prerequisites, then we can go ahead and ask these questions. Question number one. Question number one, who created Allah? Your child comes to you and they say, who created me? Where did I come from? Where do we tell them? I came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. If I came from Allah, then where did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala come from? How do we answer this question? Again, with the level of their intellect and speaking to them in a way that they have the capacity and the ability to understand, first thing first, demonstrate to them that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has the entirety of strength and the entirety of power. You and I, we are limited by certain things, right? I am poor, so I need a house. I am weak, so I need friends and companionship and money. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so rich, He doesn't need a house. That's why you can't see Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. They say, oh mom, oh dad, I see the trees and I see the oceans and I see the rivers. How come I don't see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Again, we go back to those physical examples. Do you see this watch? Do you see this door? Do you see this house? Who created it? What are they going to say? The builder, the guy who made it, the construction worker. And you take them back and you say, okay, where's the construction worker? I don't know. But he exists, right? He exists. Of course, as they get older, their questions are going to become a little bit more detailed. But you start with the physical. They say, for instance, oh mom, oh dad, I can again see all of these things. But I don't know if there's truly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't know if there's a God, because a God, I don't feel Him, I don't touch Him. They're going to say that we can tell them, for instance, it's really hot outside. Do you know that we're sitting in this house and there's a fan? This air is coming and making you cool. The air conditioner, for instance. A child from pre-K, they know about gravity. Believe me, my kids were teaching me about gravity a little while ago. They know about gravity. Can you see gravity? Can you touch gravity? Can you taste gravity? It's hot outside. This fan is blowing on my face. Can you touch air? Can you feel air? Who does a child love more than anyone than their mother? Nobody. You ask your child, for instance, okay, you love your mom? Show me love. They're going to say, I'm going to hug my mom. But that's a hug. That's not love. That feeling that they know when they watch a TV show, when they watch a movie. They see what is love. They see what is emotion. They have the capacity to understand these things on a very elementary level. Love exists. Air exists. Heat exists. Gravity exists. Sadness exists. It doesn't feel a certain way. You can't touch it. You can't see it. You can't smell it. You can't eat it. Again, you limit it to the way that they have the capacity and the ability to understand. And slowly you can build up to their ability to rationalize these ideas a bit further. As a child gets older, they ask deeper questions. And they say, okay, I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may exist, for instance. But doesn't every cause have to have an effect? And the answer is that every cause has to have an effect, except for the ultimate source. Let me give you an example. I drink a lot of coffee. If someone chooses to sweeten their coffee, what do they utilize to sweeten their coffee? Sugar. This coffee is sweet because it has sugar in it, right? Who made the sugar sweet? Or why, in itself, is the sugar sweet? What's the cause of sugar being sweet? What would someone's response be? Sugar is essentially sweet. Sugar is sweet in of itself. This cloth on the ground is white. Who made it white? White is white. It wasn't made white, it was just white. You get what I'm saying? That some things are essentially the source and the essence of what they actually are. Again, This cannot be explained to someone who's 3 or 4 years old, but as they get older, they're able to realize that utilizing this example is an evidence to demonstrate where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, or how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't have a creation. That He is the creator, doesn't need a creation because He within Himself is the source of all creation. And that through utilizing techniques like this one, or these ones, or others as well, that we're able to simplify these concepts that are oftentimes so challenging and difficult, but it starts with us recognizing and understanding that the way that we explain these things have to be done in a way that our children understand, and to, of course, open the door of their curiosity such that we're able to engage in these questions. As they get a little bit older, for instance, they may ask different questions about the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at that age, we have to make sure that we're speaking to them about our limitations, recognizing that there has to be an ultimate source without any limitation. Let me give you an example. I have these eyes, and these eyes can see a lot of things. I have these ears, and these ears can hear a lot of things. Right now, they can hear everything that's happening in this room. They can hear everything that's happening outside of this space as well. But what's happening on the women's side, I can't hear. What's happening in New York City, I can't hear. What's happening in Karbala, I cannot hear. If I turn on YouTube, I can see and I can hear. But again, physically, at this moment, I have no idea what's happening in those places. Similarly, though I have these eyes of mine, and they have the ability to see everything within this vision, I have no idea what is behind my head. No idea, unless I turn around. Demonstrating that, again, no matter how much possibility the human being has, at the same time, we are also restricted and that we are limited. Ya ayyuhan nas, antum al-fuqara. We mentioned this a couple of nights ago. Oh, you who believe. Oh, humanity. You are in a state of poverty. You don't have that capacity to know, to realize, to actualize everything. Over here, when we are able to understand just how limited we are, it takes us to us recognizing that there has to be a source that is not limited. Why? Because a world that only has limitations needs to have someone, some power, some source without any of these boundaries or without any of these restrictions. And through, again, opening up this door of curiosity, engaging our children with these questions, where we don't know, we read together, where we don't know, we ask together, where we don't know, we learn together, and we study together, we have the capacity to increase their ability to know and to learn and to perceive, and that has the chance or opportunity to be incredibly transformative. And my friends, when you take a look at children who are raised in this way, you see them grow up with a sense of confidence. You see them grow up with a sense of courage. You see them grow up with a sense of morality because they had that desire to learn, and their hearts and their capacities only cultivated a sense of consistent growth. And you see this example in the child that we are here to remember today. And that is Qasim ibn Hassan ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib. This young man who had not yet reached the age of puberty on that day of Ashura. It is stated that on the night of Ashura, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he gathers together his companions and his family members. And he begins to tell them one by one about how they should be preparing for the next day. And he reminds them that tomorrow, if the trumpets are blown, that they should prepare to fight, and that they should prepare to die, and if they don't want to, they can return back to where they came from. And as the Imam alayhi salam was uttering these lines and uttering these statements and giving his sermon, one young man, he stood up and he called out, Ya wa ana mimman yuqtal. Oh my uncle, you said that every one of us are going to die. Oh my uncle, am I also going to be amongst those who die? At this moment, I want you to imagine the scene. This young man, Qasim ibn Hassan, He doesn't have a father. He's an orphan. And he was entrusted into the care of his uncle Abi Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. Imagine how the Imam alayhi salam had to respond to him. Perhaps he didn't know what to say. Perhaps he didn't have the words of console. So instead of telling him, yes, Qasim, you are also going to be killed, he says, oh Qasim, كيف الموت عندك? How do you see death? To which he responds with this epic line, Ya am, al-mawt feek ahla min al-asad. That in your way, O my uncle Hussein, death is sweeter than honey. Allahu Akbar. Qasim ibn Hassan ibn Ali, on the 10th of Muharram, after all of the companions had been killed, and the majority of the family members, including Ali al-Akbar, had been martyred, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he goes out into the middle of the battlefield, and he utters this statement 2, 3, 4 times on the day of Ashura. He calls out, Hal min nasirin yansurni? Is there anyone from amongst you who will offer me some support or who will offer me some aid? He doesn't see anyone to respond to him. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he goes into the tents of his companions and no one was there. And then he goes into the tent of Zainab, and as he exits from there, he sees this young man, Qasim ibn al-Hassan, standing in front of his uncle, and he says, Oh Aba Abdullah, Halli min rukhsa, do you give me permission to go and fight? Imam al-Hussein says, Oh Qasim, are you kidding me? Absolutely not. You're just a young child. You are the son of my brother. You are an orphan. You have to be the one to take care of your mother. At this moment, Qasim ibn al-Hassan, he looks toward his uncle and he says, Ya Am, Ya Aba Abdullah, who do you think sent me except for my mother? At this moment, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he doesn't know what to say. And I want you to imagine the scene, 12, 13 years old. Qasim ibn Hassan, he falls to the feet of his uncle Aba Abdullah, and he begins to hold on to it, begging him, saying, Oh my uncle Aba Abdullah, please give me permission to go out and fight. It is said that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he lifts up Qasim. He doesn't tell him yes, nor does he tell him no, but it's said that he embraces him really tight until they both fall unconscious. Imam al-Hussein fell unconscious twice on the day of Ashura. The first time was when he bid farewell to Ali al-Akbar, and the second time was when he had to bid farewell to Qasim ibn al-Hassan. He lifts him up, they wake up after a few moments. It is said that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he goes into the tent of Zainab, and he says, and give me the amama of my brother Hassan ibn Ali. It is said that they take it, he cuts it in half, and then he cuts it in a quarter. He places half of it around the head of Qasim. Why does he place half of it? Because Qasim was just a young boy, the entirety wouldn't fit on his head. And then he took another quarter and he wrapped it around the waist of Qasim. What did he do with the other quarter, O Shia? You know what he had to do? He had to utilize the other quarter to pick up the body pieces of Qasim ibn al-Hassan. It is said that at this moment, Imam al-Hussein says, Oh Qasim, before you leave, go and bid farewell to your aunt Zainab. It is said that he enters into the tents of the women and everyone begins to cry. One of them embraces him. One of them kisses him. One of them touches him on the forehead. One of them calls out, Oh Aba Muhammad Hassan, have you come to rescue us on this day? Because he resembled Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam. It is said that he goes out and he runs toward the middle of the battlefield. You know, normally all of these other horsemen, they would get on top. They would utter these lines of poetry. They would have a sense of bravery and courage. Qasim was just a young boy, so he began to run out into the middle of the battlefield, calling out, فَإِن تَنْكِرُونِي فأنا شبل الحسن سبت النبي المصطفى المؤتمن وهذا الحسين كناصير. He says, if you do not know me, then know that I am the son of Hassan. I am from the lineage of Rasulullah. And do you know what you have done to my uncle? You have made him a prisoner. It is said that Qasim, he goes out, he fights valiantly. According to some reports, he kills 35 people until at that moment Qasim ibn al-Hassan, he looks down because he realizes that his slipper was broken. It is said that at this moment a man from the army of Umar ibn Sa'd says, if I am not the one who is going to cause his uncle Hussein to grieve for him, then may the curse of all of the Arabs be upon me. It is said he rushes toward Qasim ibn al-Hassan. He takes his dagger and he strikes him on the head. He calls out, "Aghithni ya Allah, ya Aba Abdullah. Help me, oh my uncle Hussein." It is said that Imam al-Hussein gets on top of a horse and he rushes toward Qasim. You know what happens by the time he reaches Qasim? He's already breathing out his last breaths. He falls down to the ground. He begins to cry. And the Imam alayhi salam, he begins to condemn his killers. I want you to imagine the scene. The Imam alayhi salam doesn't know what to do with this young man. It is said that at this moment, Hussein alayhi salam was broken. So it is said that he tries to pick up the body of Qasim. You know what the report says, my friends, and I'm sorry to narrate this to you. It is said that he tries to pick up the body of his nephew, but he doesn't have the ability to do so. You know why? Because his legs have been dismembered from his body. So he picks up the body of Qasim and he begins to drag it back. And then he places it behind the tents of Zainab alayhi salam. At this moment, Zainab, she rushes out because she hears someone calling out, Allahu Akbar. You know what she sees? She sees Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam placing the body of Qasim next to the body of Ali al-Akbar. Zainab says, oh Allah, you know what happened? You know what he says? He says, oh Zainab, go and tell his mother what happened to this child. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with grief in our hearts and with tears in our eyes. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow for us to walk in the footsteps of Muhammad and to raise us with Muhammad and to grant us a death that resembles the death of Muhammad. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the tawfiq to be amongst those who make a change in this world, walking in their footsteps, alayhim salam, to grant us their ziyarah in this life and their shafa'ah in the next life. My friends, like we know, there is one young lady, daughter of one of our community members, Abishwa Zahra, the daughter of Brother Ghulam Hassanein and Sister Masuma, who is currently in ICU and in a really critical situation, and they need our du'as during the course of these nights, and by the blessing of Sayyid al-Shuhada, Sayyid alayhi salam, that she has a quick recovery and can return back to her family. So with this grief in our hearts, I ask you to recite with me ayat Amma Yajib 5 times for her and for all of our community members who are ill all across the world. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء. 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 وصل اللهم على محمد وآله الطاهرين. ورحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة مسبوقة بالصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.